Well, first of all, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Southern California. My mother had one of the first security clearances ever for North American aviation. She was an accountant. My father made his living off the sea. He was a fisherman. So I had a great childhood. Both my parents worked. They ran their own business, and that's kind of where some of my thought process comes from. I'm very detail-orientated. So I moved here about 28 years ago and fell in love. I love this place. Can't imagine living anywhere else. And opened my own business about 20 years ago. And through owning my own business, I started networking with this amazing community and started doing grassroots projects and just realized I love doing this kind of thing in this community. And this community loves doing these kind of things. We love to get together and make something happen. So along my journey, I started going to city council meetings, and that was during the time of redevelopment. And it really struck an interest to me because we had $30 million, and I couldn't figure out where was it going. And that $30 million was supposed to remove blight and create jobs for all of us. So that's when my interest struck, because I was creating jobs, and I was working, and I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working for my community. Unfortunately, right about the time I was elected in, redevelopment was taken back by the state. But it hasn't really stopped my process of thought. And so I started looking at the whole picture as far as not just my city, but the county. And I'm coming across things that are really interesting to me. Whereas the city of Clear Lake runs on about a $4 million budget, and the county runs on about a $180 million budget. So if you wonder why other places look so nice and we look like we're falling behind, that's the reason why. We just don't have enough money to really create the sustainability that we need here. And that's kind of what happened with our redevelopment money. It sustained the staff. And that's all we've been doing really is sustaining staff. So as supervisor, I'd like to start looking at things that are coming into this community that would benefit this community. When I look at the courthouse, for instance, I wish that could have been pitched for and been here. We've got the airport property. It would have been big enough. It wouldn't have blocked any views. I wish we would have had an advocate saying that courthouse needs to be built over here so that this community, this district, would have the opportunity to have jobs and better themselves. I get asked a lot, Jerry, what would you do to make this community better? Well, first of all, I know we need a homeless shelter. And amazingly enough, a homeless shelter creates jobs. It takes personnel and people to run it. And I keep hearing we just don't have the money. Well, if you create a homeless shelter correctly, it'll sustain itself. If it has a commercial kitchen, now you're training. If it has a thrift store, now you're creating sustainability. So a homeless center is very, very possible here. It just takes somebody that thinks out the box, and I think that's me. Amen. Another thing is when I look at AB 124, is that it? The realignment, that kind of bothers me too, because I would like to see some transitional housing, some halfway housing. When somebody comes out of prison and you put them right back into a community with parole hanging over their heads, it's kind of a setup for failure, because a lot of times they go back to prison not for a crime they've committed, but for an infraction of that parole. So when I hear that there's these big busts going on in the community where we knock on doors and take them out of their homes, I think, well, why did we put them back in? Put them back in, take them out, put them in, take them out. What are we doing to help them get on their feet? And those are concerns in my community, because we know this community has a major problem. And the biggest problem is called fiscal inequality. So because we have no money, we're treated differently. And it's kind of hard to pull up out of that pit if redevelopment didn't actually create jobs for a community. So here we are, we're here, we want better, but we know it's going to take a lot of rebuilding and a lot of healing in this community. And I think that takes somebody that thinks outside the box. And I think that takes somebody with strong ties within the community to get everybody to work together and make these things happen. And I believe we can, and that's why one of the reasons I'm running. When I first thought about running, I pondered it for about 3 months. I thought, do I want to do this? Because everybody knows the last 3 years for me have been a challenge. One challenge after another, just simple things. But I've met those challenges each time. And even if the wind was knocked out of me, because of people like you, I get up and I go back at it again. So I talked about it with my family, and I was contemplating it. And And I wasn't really sure. But what convinced me was people coming to me and saying, Jerry, please run for supervisor. We want somebody strong up there that's a voice for us. And I think I'm that voice. I'm not afraid to speak for you. I'll stand my ground for you. And I think that's what it's going to take in this community because, again, like I said, there is a fiscal inequality here. 90% of our children in this district are on assisted lunches. That speaks pretty loudly to me. We think almost every child here is on assisted lunch programs. 33% of this community is below poverty level. That's serious. And you think if a third of us are below poverty level, equal that in poverty level, and what, there's just this many of us hanging by tooth and nail. So this is going to take a collaborative effort between this district, the city of Clear Lake, and the county. There has to be more collaboration because we just can't do it on our own. We just don't have enough money. When I look at the incumbent, and he brags about the million, I think he said $1.1 million or 0.2 that he's brought into this community. That's not a whole lot to brag about in 16 years. I look at Rob Brown's district, and everybody says, how does that man stay in office? Well, I'll tell you how. In 1 year, he's taken almost $3 million into the city of Clear Lake. It was the bridge on Yaddy Lane, $2.1 million. The renovation of the elementary school for the child support district, another $375,000. And they're getting a brand new skate park for $377,000. That's a lot of money. When I think that my community had to raise their own money for a skate park, and last year when we were almost going to close it up due to repairs, we only needed $5,000. Thank goodness for Redwood Healthcare District because they actually gave us the $5,000. But I feel like if I was on the board seat and I knew this district needed repairs on the only skate park, just about the only thing the children here have to do, I would have been pitching hard to get that skate park repaired. So those are the kind of things that I would like to change. I'm on a learning curve. I've never worked for the county in that direction. But I know that if I get that county seat, every time there's opportunity for something to happen in this community, I'll be pitching for you. And when there's times that maybe nothing's happening, I'll be that person that's creative enough to think outside the box to create what we need here in this district. So my overall picture of this district is I love it, but there are some serious problems here. We all know the road issues. That was an issue when we incorporated 30 years ago. The board passed the resolution to incorporate us. They initiated. So the county initiated us to be a city. We're 10 square miles. That's a pretty big piece of property. When there was no fiscal analysis in the paperwork. I pulled the documents from the state, no fiscal analysis. So it's kind of hard to figure out how we got this way other than there just never was enough money in the first place. Law enforcement. Okay, this is kind of some sticky tar, and I don't want to get too deep into it. But I would like to see a centralized law enforcement for the county. I believe that duplicating services is a problem. I'd like to see a centralized law enforcement so that we have better services here in the city of Clear Lake. We hear constantly that there just isn't enough money for traffic control. Our staff is under-resourced, but we're kind of top-heavy. And when you call, the call goes to the sheriff's department, it's referred to our dispatch. Seems like we could just call the sheriff's department and they would dispatch for us. So I think that there's some top-heaviness going on, and I really believe a centralized law enforcement would be the way to have better policing, maybe at less cost or even at equal cost, but that is part of this district's problem, is we just don't have enough money. So 63% of anything that goes into the municipal fund in this district goes straight to our police department, which is under-resourced. So we've got to talk about these things. You know, there's this fear to talk about law enforcement. I'm not afraid. I have law enforcement in my family. I'm very proud of him. I understand the essentialness of law enforcement. I'm the first one to hit 911 when something's going on in my neighborhood. But I'm also somebody that lives right in the core of this district. And I see that there's no traffic control. And that's ground level to stop crime. If you have traffic control going on, The criminal element sees the police moving around town and stopping cars. If somebody has a gun or drugs or paraphernalia, it's stopped at the ground level. It's not waited until the big explosion happens and then race down the street and go after it. So I'd like to see a centralized law enforcement so that we would have better services in this district. It's something that if I were in that chair, I would be discussing that. Anybody have any questions to kind of kickstart me on some thought here? Yes, Wanda.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment for all of you. Jerry can win this if we all get out and vote. I can't vote for her because I don't live in her district, but it's going to require everybody getting out there. 3 people in the race, and the other woman in the race is going to peel off some votes of Jerry's. So we need to have everybody get out and vote and ask your neighbors to get out and vote for Jerry. So it's going to depend on how many get out to vote, and this is not a presidential election. So clearly, less people come out to vote, but we have to change that this time. We've got to get out and vote for Jerry.
Right.
I want to say one more thing before I answer that question, Sheila. I don't believe that we should have to pay more taxes for services the rest of the county is receiving in Mason.
Right.
I don't think we should have to pay extra to live here. So,
I think that most of the people here probably have decided to vote for you, and the issue is what needs to be done. That going on this woman's remark here as well. What do we need? Money, envelope stuffing, doorbell ringing. What would be effective?
there are slips up here. So if you sign up, I do have a campaign manager and a campaign crew here that was here this morning setting up, waving hands. This is my campaign crew. This is my campaign manager. So there are forms at the door. If you put your email address on there, we'll keep you brought of what's going on and where to be and what we need help with. And believe me, we won't turn anybody away that's offering help. We're going to be walking these neighborhoods shortly. I've got another gal that isn't here today, but she's unciphering the CD that I got in the voter registers for the last 5 years. She's got it all detailed out, so when we walk, we'll know which doors to knock on or which phone calls to hit. So I've met most of my budget goals so far. I've met all of them, and now I'm just building to get my mailers out. So far, we're building momentum, and I feel pretty confident. Akila?
I don't actually live in the district, even though I live in the town, so I'm concerned. But you touched on something that's important, that's about jobs, because I haven't heard anyone talk about jobs. And I do go to the city council meetings, as you know. So tell me what your vision is of bringing some jobs into this town.
I think, I don't like to see people put the cart before the horse. So they talk about, well, how are you going to market? How are you going to do that? How are you going to market this place? To me, that's putting the cart before the horse. I think first we need to talk about how are we going to heal this community. And we need some healing. So when I think of jobs, I want to think of a trade school that creates jobs and teaches people how to work and how to go out into the workforce. I think of a homeless center, because a homeless center creates jobs and gets people back on their feet so they can go to work. I think of transitional housing, because those kind of things heal your community and also create jobs. So before I think of a big box store that most of us can't afford to go shop in, I think of there's got to be steps. How are we going to heal ourselves first? And in that healing process, you create jobs along the way. So that's my thought on creating jobs. I think if we start putting things in place that actually create something that's going to create a more positive flow, it'll create jobs, and from those jobs, then we can start marketing ourselves once we kind of heal, because this community is in dire need of help. We really need help.
When you're talking about centralized law enforcement, I wonder if anybody is old enough to remember, or if we can find out, during the 50s and 60s, when the summer times here were kind of wild and woolly, much more so than today, I understand. What was it? Was it county sheriffs at that time?
It was.
Does anybody? How did that work? Because it seems we have the city of Clear Lake has. Well, no.
Well, we incorporated in 1983.
Yeah.
And that's when we created our own police department and passed Proposition 8.
Well, I'm interested in
which
the
is
period of
asset
time
sales
before
tax.
that.
The period of time before that was the sheriff's office.
So that's a centralized sort of.
Right, because we weren't a city. You only get a police department when you become a city. So we had centralized law enforcement. But I want to remind you, in that 30 years, our population has doubled and our infrastructure has dropped. So in 30 years, we're a lot more people with a lot less money to work with. And so that's become a problem for some of us. You know, one of the reasons I didn't back the tax measure is because we have 25 miles of roads in the cores of these neighborhoods that will never be touched. They consider them private roads, even though you asked people 10, 15 years ago they were grading them. And all of a sudden they've decided now we can't grade them, we can't touch them. And that's a problem because taxes, you can only tax 2% over a state tax. So if Measure L passes, that's the lake tax, that's a half cent. Measure P is already in place, that's a half cent. So that only gives us 1 more cent. And that's a lifeline. So we have to be really careful when we start talking taxes, that it's not a general tax, because that'll go into the general fund. And as you have to do pay increases, eventually what will happen, because there's no infrastructure improvement, within 5 or 6 years, that money will be doing nothing for you but paying pay increases. The same thing we've been going through with pay staff. So we have to be really cautious when we start talking about taxing a community that's this poor and that we've already almost maxed out over the state max. So we have to be really careful when we use taxes in this community. Yes.
Our opponent, Jeff Smith, definitely gave us the vouchers of Section 8 housing. I'm one of those who are in 100 who are going to get the Section 8 housing. But what you're going to do if you're elected as the new County Board of Supervisors with the vote of all people in June to continue the Section 8 housing as we speak, because permanent housing is also really important for us.
You know, I would have to really look into that situation to answer that honestly and probably correctly. It's not an area that I'm very familiar with, but I learned very quickly. So if I were to start looking into that, I would probably set up citizens meetings and get input of people that are in that position. And like I said, I'm not really familiar with Section 8 or that area, but I'm willing to learn. So that might be something I need to work on.
Right, because the other candidates have not mentioned anything about permanent housing. And I'm really glad that our opponent definitely gave us the chance to get the Section 8 housing. But I would like to see that this program continue with him leaving office for good. Because I want to know.
Frank, explain to me, he gave you a voucher?
No, what happened is that back in December, 2 days after he definitely made another thing, you know, like I mentioned in this morning's club meeting, he definitely got something passed with the Board of Supervisors to begin the opening of the Section 8 housing, which we were for 6 years not into that Section 8 housing. So by January, when the first applications definitely went in, I was very lucky to be maybe the number 40 out of 100 to definitely get into the waiting list for the Section 8 housing. It was thanks to the County Board of Supervisors to do that, but I need to see him go so the program can continue with you or the other people who sit in the board after.
So actually you've got an application and you're just on a waiting list.
Exactly.
And the way I understand Section 8 to work is when an opening comes up, it may be in another county. It doesn't necessarily mean, because that's why we get a lot of people that move from other areas here into our low-income housing.
Yeah.
Because Section 8 isn't specific. Once you're on that list, they let you know when something opens up and it isn't necessarily in your own community. Now that I know.
Yeah, exactly. So the question I have for you, Jerry, is how are you going to do if you get elected to the County Board of Supervisors to continue what the previous Board of Supervisors will leave off of this program? Because if there's going to be a new Board of Supervisors, this program has to continue.
Well, I think that Section 8 is through the state, and if all he did was give you a voucher to get on the waiting list, it was basically information to get on the waiting list. It
Yeah.
sounds like to me, Frank.
Yeah, it was from the county, by the way, because
Right.
the Department of Social Services has a housing development agency, and they're the ones who gave us the vouchers. And when I asked them this question, will the housing be out of Lake County, they said no, it will continue being here in Lake County.
Well, I'll have to do some homework on that. Thank you for bringing it to my attention, Frank.
Sure.
We all need to get that, if she is elected, out of our vocabulary. It's when she is elected.
When she's elected.
When she is elected. When she is on the Board of Supervisors.
Good idea, Wes.
Not if, not I hope, when.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, I know that you are a huge advocate for our community of disabled or mentally impaired people in our community. And I know that
doesn't learn the same as other children, that's something that we need to step up. I know that through my grandson's travels and journey through school, there's been a lot of times where there were certain things that the state should be offering. He has a hard time writing, so they should have mechanisms so he can learn to write. I'll always be an advocate for, I've got a lot of heart. Anybody that knows me knows I don't want to see anybody suffering or going without or in the struggle. And most of the things that I know I've learned from life's experiences. I didn't pick it up and read it in a book, but I've experienced these things personally. I have a large family, and I think if you do have a large family, most of us have experienced something with one of our kids or a family member or a grandchild. It's not new. And I think with the levels of autism and these things going on, what is it, 1 in every 7 children now are being diagnosed with autism? Do you know the statistics?
I gave you the card and this rock.
I think it's 1 in every 7.
The statistics are definitely going up, and I know that we do have a large special needs community, especially here at Clear Lake. And a lot of parents are not getting resources, or they're going through the cracks because the majority of the resources are being offered in Lakeport, and families are too broke to drive to and from Lakeport as often as they need to get those services. And even our mental health they don't have enough money to do the proper evaluations. There's not enough counselors. There's not enough here in this county. So we're suffering.
I know that there has been some grant money given to behavioral health. They're doing some remodeling and moving around. I think it's great that AODS and behavioral health are now linked. They're in the same building because a lot of people with behavioral health problems also have problems with addiction. They're kind of linked. So I'm glad to see that that operation is linking together and they're working together. So I do know that we've had a lot of inefficiencies here in this district, but I do know that those inefficiencies have been recognized and there is some money coming here now to work on those problems. But I agree, it's a really tough spot to be in when you can't find the right services for your child and they need services. So as your support supervisor, anytime there's opportunity for expansion or anything that would help mothers or children that are going through these kind of problems, I will be your advocate.
That same vein, Clear Lake gets left out on a lot of things. Lakeport's much smaller. So they wanted to wipe out the courts in Clear Lake. You have to fight for it.
Right, I know, and that's really rough because I know we've been really discussing we've really been discussing Planned Parenthood because there's been risk of losing that program here in this district, and we want to keep it here. So when you told me, and now you're getting responses from all over because I do network, and we want to see these programs stay here because the need is greatest here. I mean, this district really has a lot of need, and like I said, I just don't feel like we should have to pay extra for what everyone else in the county is taking for granted and the services they're receiving. So that's something I'll stand strong on every time.
What about the lake?
The lake. Everybody wants to know about the lake. Well, I'll tell you, I've watched Measure L from the first time it went on the ballot, and that's a question that everybody asks, what about the lake and what are you going to do about the lake? Well, for one, it's a living organism. The lake is going to do certain things because it's a lake and it goes through these things. It's a living organism. But we do need to pay attention. I'd like to see the Middle Creek Restoration Project finished. I know that's really essential to the lake's health. We need to pay attention to the nutrients and the phosphorus from the dirt roads that are going into the lake. There's nothing I can do personally, but collaboratively, we can all do something. We need to pay attention when we're washing our cars with high phosphorus soap and it's running into a drain into the road. When we're going down a dirt road, slow down. That phosphorus leaches into the road. Measure L looks pretty good this year. I'd like to see more money down at the lower arm. The lower arm looks a little neglected. I think they've offered $275,000 for Burns Valley Creek, which I think there was a loan 6 years ago, but they worked hard on it, and I think that we've got to start somewhere. We can't just expect things to happen with no money. Even the pictures that were taken last year with the satellite, those were very expensive pictures, but they're very valuable. So I'll be supporting the lake measure. I think they've worked diligently, very hard on it. They've involved the community, and it's got a sunset clause, so it's 10 years with earmarks. So I'm hoping that does some good. Yes, Beth?
Supervisor Smith is always out there during the summer on the airboat getting rid of the cyanobacteria clots or pods, whatever. Would you be doing that?
No, I wouldn't be doing that. I'd probably be out riding my Harley on those days. I'll tell you, we'll never see the lake look as bad as it did. And I truly believe this. I'm going to say it out loud. Because the sewer line, in the beginning of June, when we were out testing the water, the E. coli bacteria was like at 1,800. As soon as they hooked up the new sewer line, it dropped down to like 38 in the same month.
When
So
was that, Jerry?
in June of last year.
June of last year?
Yes. And if you notice, we started to get it, and all of a sudden it cleared right up. Well, our sewer lines ran in the lake from, so our sewer lines ran in the lake from where the old Garner's Resort is. The sewer lines actually ran into the lake. They only came up out of the lake under Lotawanas and then back into the lake. When Walmart and all the hamburger stands and everything hooked up, and then to Lower Lake also, now we're pumping uphill. So what was happening is we were getting backup. I mean, you can see toilet paper floating in the water. Regardless of what anybody wanted to tell us, we kept saying, it smells like, you know what?
No.
It was.
That's not what it is. But I'll tell you what, now that we fixed the sewer line and that sewer line hooked up, it was an instant clarity of the water. And I don't think we'll ever see it that bad. And I have to tell you, that was before I was seated. And I was going to those protest hearings. And I was the only person from this district or this city at those protest hearings because I own a piece of property on Lakeshore Drive. And I watched all my friends losing their properties and renting their resorts to weekly rentals and trying to hang on for dear life. And when that conversation came up at the Board of Supervisors, I went and I said, listen, we can't afford a pay increase. 25% of our ratepayers right now are not paying their sewer rate increases. So when you talk, you're going to raise our sewer rates, how are we going to pay for it? We're not paying for them now. And people that own little resorts with 7 or 8 toilets pay 7 or 8 sewer fees. For every toilet is a sewer fee. So it was really frightening. I had people telling me I'm going to have to tear down some of my cottages to keep my piece of property. So I went to those sewer rate increase hearings, and I asked the board if they would come over here and talk to my community because we were too poor to drive over there. And they said, yes, Jerry, we'll come over and do the hearings in your city. They never did. I will never tell you I will do something and not do it. If I tell you that I'll be over here and we'll hold the hearing here, I'll be over here and we'll hold the hearing here. And another thing, when that was all happening, at that point there was $1 million in reserves in sewer fees. And we know we have the biggest city paying sewer fees. There was $1 million sitting. And when asked about that, they said, well, that's for an emergency. And that's what I'm now, and there we go again with that fiscal inequality. Or so, it doesn't matter. What are they going to do about it? And I want to change that. I want to change that. And I think all together we can change that fiscal equality.
Jerry, that what you said about that sewer line, everybody wondered what happened last year. I mean, I go boating, and in the springtime, the algae was getting it on. All back in Cache Creek, there were thick mats of algae floating, and you could see it was going to be a slam bang season for the algae. And all of a sudden, but we've talked about it, and nobody has ever said what you said. Does nobody know about that?
Well, don't you know that's why I take the beating I do? Because I'm always going to tell you what I saw. I believe my lying eyes. You watch it, you see it. I was testing with Sarah, and because I serve on Platte, we were testing the
You
water.
saw the amazing thing that happened with the lake this year.
I
it's
don't
like,
think we'll ever see it that bad.
oh no, that good.
It's my belief. I could be wrong. I'm wrong sometimes. But that sewer line did hook up, and the E. coli bacteria did dramatically change.
The difference between
and
the
we
spring and
watched
the
it
summer
clear.
was really dramatic, and that has to be the reason.
And everybody says it blows over here from the other side of the lake. It probably does, but they're underground currents that are probably doing about 30 or 40 miles an hour. It's a natural process that the lake does. So hopefully we'll never have to live in our own feces again. I thought that was really a terrible thing. And no, I won't be in an airboat racing up and down trying to make it sink.
I want to thank Wanda for my exploration. I had a hard morning, you guys that went to the club, so bear with me at this recovery. But we're getting into a very important subject called the water rates. And we just had a candidate who just came in for Aurora who was experiencing a problem down in Lucerne with high water rates. Since you're going to be our new District 2 Supervisor, what are you going to do about the water rates? Because back in January, my manager, who I live in the Avenues, announced that Canacti Water District was increasing our rates double, and believe me, people in the Avenues are fed up with high water rates.
I lived in the Avenues for 10 years. They were high when I lived there. You know, this is something that, it's not just Lake County. I think this is something that's going on all over the state right now. We have a water shortage. We all need to, you know, think about that when we're using water. When we're brushing our teeth and the water's going full blast, shut it off for a minute. When we're washing dishes, fill up a sink of soapy water, fill up a sink of fresh water. I think we all need to conserve because nothing's getting cheaper. You know, milk, nothing that we buy is getting cheaper. Everything is getting more and more expensive. So I think some of it is up to us to be conservative. And then again, it's times like this when everybody joins together and has discussions, and that's what makes change. So, you know, I haven't been faced with that independently in this district, but I know that if I saw the kind of water rates that are going on in the CERN in my district, you all know that I'm a fighter, and you can't keep me down. So I would definitely fight.
Good luck.
Yes, Ron.
That green ribbon.
This green ribbon, this is because the Democratic Party and I also support the legalization of marijuana, the legalization and taxation of marijuana. You know, agriculture is our future here in Lake County.
Yep.
And I'd like to see more crops besides wine, and not just marijuana. I'd like to see 10 fruit stands all the way around the lake. I'd like to see families growing our vegetables and having fruit stands so that we can go and walk around the lake and buy food that's grown locally in our own community. But I also know that with this progressive change, I think by 2016, marijuana is probably going to be legalized in California. And we should have been on top of this way before Colorado. We're supposed to be the progressive state. This is California. And with the lack of jobs and opportunity, you know, it's not just about smoking cannabis. It's fiber, it's paper, it's clothing, you can build homes. There's a whole gamut of things that cannabis can do to this community. So it's sad that this negative light's been put on everything. I don't think everything has to be negative. You know, I don't partake in alcohol. I don't drink alcohol, but I don't shun anybody that does. And I think that those days have got to stop, of people judging each other and pointing the finger at different lifestyles. I'm a progressive Democrat. Well, thank you very much. I thank you all for being here today. Your support feels wonderful. And we're going to take this seat. So thank you very much.